It's early spring, the forsythias have just opened, and this is a great time to go and get some free hellebores. In this video, I'm going to show you where to find them, how to identify them, and then I'll show you what to do with them. I'm sitting here beside one of my larger hellebore clumps. If you have a hellebore like this, you probably have lots of seedlings. This plant will make seeds in another 6 to 8 weeks. And those seeds drop down right underneath the mother plant. These seeds tend not to germinate too quickly. They like to have a cold period, so they will usually sit in the soil for at least one winter before they germinate. And many times they will germinate over the next couple years. But what I find interesting with this plant is that the seeds don't spread very far from the plant. They're usually right under the plant. Let me show you where I found some seedlings. Right in the middle of the plant here, if we look right down below the flowers, you'll see the small seedlings. The first year they germinate, they'll only make a single leaf, and that's the cotyledon leaf. In the second and third year, they'll make a leaf with 3 or 4 parts to it. Look more like the mother plant, and then they're very easy to identify. Because this plant's on a slope, I also find a few seedlings right here. I guess the seeds drop down and roll down the hill a little bit, and so there are a few right here. But I've never found any seeds 2 or 3 feet away in that direction or in this direction. It's always right underneath the mother plant. If you want to grow hellebores from seed, you can collect your own seed. The trick to it is to collect them when they're still a bit on the green side. And keep them moist. Don't let these seeds dry out. Once they dry out, they need to be stratified, and then it's a much longer process to get them to germinate. If you have older plants in the garden, you don't have to bother with all that. You'll have baby plants underneath the mother plant. They don't grow very well because they're shaded. So right now this plant is in flower and it really doesn't have any leaves here. In another few weeks, it'll start making leaves, and they will shade this whole area. This plant will be this big by midsummer, so the seedlings underneath simply can't grow. We have to rescue those, pot them up, and I'll show you exactly how to do that. Here's another spot where I have some seedlings. I used to have a large mother plant here, and I decided to move it and change the garden a little bit. Once I took that mother plant away, all of the seeds started to germinate, and I've been getting seedlings out of this batch every spring for the last 3 years. There's still at least a dozen plants here. Most of the small plants in this area are hellebores. Here's a very small seedling. Here's one that's a little larger with that distinctive 3 leaves on it. Another one over here, another one over here. And way down in here, there's a whole bunch of little ones. This one just has the small cotyledon leaves. Doesn't look like a hellebore yet, but I'm pretty sure it will be. There are more over here. I could dig these little ones up as well, but I like to leave them in the garden for a couple years to get larger. I'm going to dig these bigger ones right now. So gently remove the mulch. Turns out that these seedlings are sitting right on top of a fern. I don't want to disturb the fern. So we'll take some on the edge here. So there's one there. There we go. The smaller ones you can probably pull out without the trowel if your soil is nice and moist. And if I have to choose between the hellebore or the fern, I don't want to damage the fern, so I'm going to pull these guys out. And in a couple cases like that one, I just didn't get enough roots, so we'll throw it away. There's a larger one here that is easy to dig up because it's not beside the fern. There, that one has a much better root system. All right, that's enough. Let me show you what I do with these. Now that I have my seedlings dug up, I go through and I sort them. This is a pretty large one. Even has a second growth on the side. At the other end of the extreme, we have this really tiny one. Now it has a brown leaf. That's from last year. And here's this year's leaf starting to grow up, but there's not much in the way of a root system. That's another pretty good sized one. That's not bad size either. In the bottom here I have smaller ones. All of these will grow into nice plants. I picked the pot size based on the plant. So the really small plants, I do put them in the smaller pots, but that's not absolutely necessary. I do that mostly for space. I could just as easily use the same pot for all of these. After I looked through my seedlings, I noticed that this one was a pretty large one. And then I turned it over and found a flower underneath. I hadn't seen that earlier. And it's actually a pretty nice flower, so I think I'm going to keep this one for myself. Unfortunately, the root was underneath a rock, and so I damaged the root quite a bit. There's not much left, but it will be fine. Hellebores are tough plants. It's hard to kill these guys. So when I pot this one up, what I'll do is I'll take the flower off right away. I don't want the plant putting energy into the flower. I'll get another flower next year. These other seedlings are going to go into my Master Gardener plant sale. So for those, I'm going to pot them up into these pots here. I've got lots of these and I'd really like to get rid of them. I normally would use plastic pots, probably this size for most of these seedlings. But for these, we'll go with this pot here. Potting up is really quite simple. What kind of soil would you use? A lot of people, when they talk about seedlings, they use a soilless mix. And I do that for the seeds I germinate inside. But these guys have already been growing in my garden soil. There's a lot of clay and they're used to that. So I'm just going to use the same soil. I'm going to pot them up in my garden soil. Put a little soil in the bottom. Pick up a seedling. The brown leaves are from last year. These are evergreen, but in my Zone 5 garden, the leaves really don't last from one year to the next. So you can pull this one off, just for aesthetic reasons. The plant doesn't care. And plant the rest. Always plant all your plants the same height they were before. There are a few exceptions, like tomatoes, but for the most part, you're better off planting things at the same height. There, that's all there's to it. Now I'll water this. I'll put it in part shade. Anytime I repot something, it goes into part shade. Too much sun can harm it. Right now it needs to start growing some new roots because I'm sure I damaged the root system when I pulled it out of the ground. Once it has started making roots, 2 to 3 weeks from now, I can give it more light. It doesn't need fertilizer. It already has nutrients in the soil. So in a few minutes, I'll have a dozen plants to give to friends. Now it's time for you to go in the garden and look under your hellebores to see if you have some seedlings. And if you don't already have hellebores, find a friend who does. Pay them a visit, show them where to find the seedlings, and I'm sure they'll share with you.